As many of you may know, England has got a very long history of witchcraft and witch trials. Bedfordshire as a county is actually no different. There's the four witches of Dunstable and Headless Meg, who'll definitely get their own videos. But the topic of this video is Milton's mother and Mary Sutton, both of whom found their end at the hangman's noose in Bedford jail. Theirs is a story of madness, revenge, and death, of fear and persecution. So without further ado, let's start from the beginning. Mother Sutton was a hog tender that had lived in the quiet village of Milton for 20 years without incident. She seemingly lived a peaceful life into old age, and when she was in her elder years, her daughter Mary moved in to help tend to the hogs. It was after Mary had moved in that the landowner, one Master Enger, noticed changes in his livestock. To say he noticed changes is something of an understatement. His cattle had gone completely ballistic. Filled with such an anger, they began cannibalizing each other, tearing out and consuming each other's guts, or drowning themselves in a crazed frenzy. It was after this event that the master and villagers began to believe that previous injuries to their livestock could well have been chalked up to the bewitchment and the witchery of Mary Sutton. This, however, would of course not have been enough to persecute two seemingly innocent women, either the mother or the daughter. The events that happened next left little to the imagination of the villagers of Milton. One day, a group of children were disturbed from their singing and playing when a boy began throwing rocks and mud at them. Outraged at the assault, one of Enger's servants angrily approached the lad, demanding that he stop what he was doing at once. But, unperturbed, the lad continued the attack until eventually the servant grabbed the boy and boxed his ears several times. The boy ran in tears back home to his mother. The next day, the same servant took a horse cart full of corn to market when his route was intercepted by a fat black sow that, running in circles in a crazed manner, made the horses skittish and caused an interruption in the journey. Eventually they were calmed and the journey continued. However, in the end, this happened again on the way back from the market. The servant again managed to calm the horses and the goods were undamaged. But the same black sow was seen walking straight into the house of Mother Sutton. Not long after this, the very same servant was hit with a far more terrifying sort of misfortune. Whilst working in the fields, it's said that he was stung by a beetle. His body seized up and he collapsed to the ground, unable to either move or talk. Horrified, he was taken to bed where, again, it has been said, Mary Sutton sat at the foot of his bed, knitting and staring at him. Every so often, she would make sexual remarks, telling the servant the way to cease his paralysis would be to take her into his bed. Being the upstanding citizen and Christian that he was, he rejected this. And after rejecting this invitation, the servant managed to speak to Enger, who had Mary Sutton dragged, kicking and screaming, into the room from her home, where she was made to bleed, causing the servant to receive some respite and a general improvement. But before leaving the room, Mary quietly approached the servant and, touching his neck, ensured that he went straight back to his previous torment. Perhaps the final nail in the coffin involved Master Enger's own 7-year-old son. Due to the chilling events that had taken place, the whole village was rife with gossip and stories of Mother Sutton and her evil daughter. It was due to this that Enga's son approached Mary and Mother Sutton. Emboldened and very foolishly, the boy threw rocks at the elderly woman, yelling at her and calling her a witch. Much like the case with the servant, the boy fell ill shortly after and, very sadly, he passed away. Understandably, Master Engers was heartbroken at the loss of his son. But I personally believe that underneath the veneer of grief laid a quiet rage, a bitterness, and with that rage, a desire for revenge against the Sutton women. Under the advice of a friend, Enga had Mother Sutton dragged from her home, beaten and dragged to the River Ouse to be swum. Now, to be swum is actually a really simple concept. If you float in a river, you're a witch, and because of this, you'll be executed. If you don't float, you're innocent, but you drown. Regardless, it was in the great river of Bedfordshire that she was judged. Tossed into the river, it said Mother Sutton floated. She was taken out and inspected by village women who reported she had a T under her left leg, and that this was the sign of a witch. Once more she's tied thumb to big toe and tossed in the river where, much to her misfortune, she floated. It was said that she span in a small whirlpool, and even when servants were on each end of the rope, they tossed her up and down, but she still floated, and she didn't ever sink below the water's surface. What happened next ensured Mother Sutton's demise. Surprisingly, it came at the words of her own grandson Henry. Very quickly, whilst the son may have confessed on his own behalf, there is a huge chance that he was beaten into doing it and threatened, so it's worth bearing that in mind. But the boy claimed he had actually heard his mother and grandmother discussing how best to enact their vengeance against Master Enger. He said they intended to torment the landowner, as well as admitting to having killed his son by use of spirits and ghosts. Despite professing her innocence up until this point, Mary Sutton caved, and she confessed, confirming every word her son had said. So, with the die well and truly cast, Mother Sutton and her daughter were imprisoned and put on trial at Bedford Jail. They were found guilty of witchcraft on the 30th of March 1612, and they were hung until they were dead on the 7th of April 1612. Presumably after the death of Mother Sutton, things returned to normal for the village of Milton. However, it's very possible the Sutton women were simply victims of persecution and ignorance. They wouldn't have been the first nor last to have been unfairly accused of being witches, but I suppose I'll leave it for the listener to decide what exactly they were. Before we conclude, I do find it important to mention that on the road between Wilden and Ravenscroft, an elderly woman in a long black trailing garment has been seen several times gliding along the path. It's been said that when approached, she'll stare at you with such a look of malevolence and hatred it can only be called evil. Many believe this is the spirit of Mother Sutton, wandering the Bedfordshire road, filled with a black rage and a hellish fury at those that killed her and her daughter, seemingly unable to find peace in death after a life that concluded with so much suffering. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Bedfordshire Chronicles. Please leave any comments in the comments section below and like and subscribe if you enjoy the content.